My son, ask for thyself another kingdom, but that which I leave is too small for thee.
Greetings, Doc Hardtree here, back with Wolfbane in installment 2 of the Versus the World sub-show, Your History. Last time we spoke, we left off on the historical figure of Vlad Dracula, but I want to take a quick sidebar here to introduce the bumper music. That was Iron Maiden performing Alexander the Great. One of the reasons I actually passed a college history exam was thanks to Iron Maiden. If you want to know your history, the metal genre is the best way to go about doing it. Sabaton, Gravedigger, Iron Maiden, you will learn stuff, I promise. Right, Wolf?
Correct.
But back to the topic of the intro here. So we left off on Vlad the Impaler, Vlad Tepes, Vlad Dracula, Well, Vlad Dracula was his father, correct?
Yeah.
All right. Order of the Dragon. Instituted mainly to actually protect Christianity in that region. It wasn't a son of the devil thing like it was made out to be, although that makes for great theater.
Dracula literally meant son of the dragon. His father was Dracula, or Dracul, meaning dragon.
And it was I believe, a conference they had in Nuremberg, or one of the regions in Germany, pretty much to address the incursion of the Ottoman Empire and to preserve Christianity, because, like we said before, Wallachia, nowadays Transylvania, and Romania were a small pocket of Christian villages and towns surrounded by the ever-increasing Ottoman Empire, which had no love of Christianity, and that was sort of the deal with that. And actually, in a means to try and appease the Ottomans at first, Vlad's father did pay handsome tribute. In addition to paying tribute, he actually let the, I think it was Mehmed 1 or 2, adopt, by adopt I mean kidnap, politically, his 2 sons, Vlad and Radu. Vlad did not take well to Ottoman captivity, and Radu did. There's a lot of speculation about what kind of things were done to them as young children. Radu seemed to openly embrace being part of Mehmet's harem. Vlad never really warmed up to that particular part of the captivity, but he did learn Turkish. He did memorize the Quran inside and out, along with his already extensive knowledge of the Bible. They taught him how to fight. They taught him how to interrogate, and it was here, under the captive Ottoman situation he was in, that he first began to taste the sadistic side of what would later be his reputation. And honestly, if I were to go through what he went through, I can't say I'd be any better. I'd probably be worse. What do you think, Wolf?
Oh, I agree on that one, Doc.
Now, you are probably more well-versed in some of the things that happened to the prince slaves in the Ottoman Empire. Do you want to give maybe a PG-13 description?
It really doesn't get more PG than how you described it.
Okay. Yes, again, I hate to draw from pop culture here because I get my information from other sources, but the movie Dracula Untold, it did very briefly touch on some of these things, but like I said, that was a PG-13 movie and with a PG-13 depiction. Now, there was another movie, Dracula something or other. It actually starred the guy who played Dracula, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I forget the name of the movie, but it was a very accurate historical depiction, as much as Hollywood could be. It actually had Roger Daltrey of The Who playing one of the kings that Vlad sort of sought out for counsel. But it depicted the situation Radu and Vlad were in way more detail, very uncomfortable detail, in the beginning of their captivity. let's just say, the Turks like their young boys. But moving on, once Vlad escaped, came into power, because Vlad was actually deposed twice. He had to come back in, regain control of the region from, I guess, his father, who was assassinated. And then he either retreated or he was imprisoned again and had to come back and establish himself again. Now, to give you an idea of how fearful his reputation was versus how short of a time he actually ruled, Vlad the Impaler, Vlad Dracula, came into his first reign around the year 1448. He was later deposed through some nefarious means. I believe he was imprisoned or sought refuge somewhere. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments section. He came back for his second reign in 1456 and ruled until 1462. That's considered his main reign. And even combined, that's not a whole lot of years added up based on the reputation that he got. And the reputation he got was pretty much defending his people at all costs. He's still considered a folk hero by many Romanians. And as a matter of fact, Bram Stoker, when he first wrote Dracula, was demonized in that region because they considered it a slander to who they feel is the reason why their whole region survived. So, moving on. Wolf, you had a couple of interesting Dracula tidbits here.
Yes, I did. Since you brought up the Bram Stoker Dracula, something not too many people know, there was an actual Frankenstein family as well, which Frankenstein family and Vlad's family were actually mortal enemies.
Really?
They fought in many battles against each other.
I knew someone who was once close to me who actually visited the ruins of Frankenstein's castle. From what I understand, it's just a couple of pillars and a couple of scary gargoyles left.
It's a little bit more than that, but yeah, it is pretty run down.
But moving on to your specialty here, because I've kind of tapped out my my Dracula fanboyism right now. The one thing I want to address, and then we can transition to armor and weapons. My favorite sword throughout all of his stories of swords is the modified cutlass called the Kilij that Vlad was proficient in, as well as most of his infantry and army. It was basically just a weighted katana. Well, not a katana, I'm sorry, a weighted scimitar, and it had so much cutting power as to just be absurd. Did you have any ideas, or not ideas, but any input on the gear that they used?
They used pretty much the standard gear of most of Eastern Europe at the time, not heavy armor. They were starting to transition out of the heavy armor, but the sword you just mentioned, yes, that was the preferred weapon of the region. It was meant to hack people down. Pure and simple.
And I don't know, when it comes to impalement versus crucifixion, I would much rather be tied to a cross than smashed. If the stories are true, what way to demoralize his enemies is essentially make a forest of dead people for the enemy troops to have to walk through. And Vlad was a firm believer in, well, if one village uprises against me, you put them all on stakes, the other villages won't follow suit. And there's a lot of parallels between Dr. Doom and Vlad the Impaler, because they're both demonized by everybody else who doesn't live where they rule. I think actually in the Ultimate Universe of Marvel, they try to draw some sort of a family tree lineage between Dr. Doom and Dracula. I think for that reason. But essentially, if you lived within the confines of Wallachia and you were obedient, or not even obedient, just not openly antagonistic towards Vlad, you pretty much had a pretty good life. Like I said earlier when we closed the last show about the Golden Goblet at rest at the fountain. That Golden Goblet stayed there for all of Vlad's reign, and it was never stolen because people, A, respected him, and B, knew what would happen if Vlad found out you took the glass. Just like the guard who fell asleep at the post. When Vlad found out about it, he promptly stuck him on a stake in the town square, and when asked, well, he just fell asleep. Why did you do that to him? Well, so the next guy won't fall asleep. So that's like I said, I have a healthy respect for Vlad Tepish. Moving on. Now, the vampire myth. Do you have any particular input as to how that actually got started?
Well, as many people know, the myths started from the stories of Vlad sitting amongst the forest of the dead, all the impaled enemies of state and the invading Ottomans, and it was said that he would dip his bread in their blood and feast upon it. Well, that's still kind of debatable because it is coming from the Ottomans and the Turks' point of view.
Who wanted to demonize him to make, to pretty much make their troops not scared shitless and actually want to maybe take out the monster.
Possibly.
Or Vlad just did it.
Yes, I could go either way on it. Considering some of the deeds he's done, yeah, I wouldn't put it past him to doing it.
Now, another thing I liked about the whole Vlad myth, and this is I think what kind of perpetuated the vampire myth even further, was archaeologically speaking, as well as even at the time, though he was buried in a catacomb or in the mausoleum of his castle, his body wasn't there after excavating the coffin.
No, it wasn't. They found animal bones, but no body.
Once again, Dracula, if you're out there, I'd like to take this moment to say hi to our new vampire overlord. If you want to have a minion, I will totally do your dirty work for you. I just want maybe a little bit of immortality. Till I get bored. Immortality is kind of a very, everybody wants it, but I don't think anyone knows what to do with it.
Doc, you're backing the wrong team. Werewolves, much cooler than that.
No, I totally understand that werewolves are much cooler, but at the same rate, there's no historical leader I can think of that's ever been parallel to a werewolf. Do you know of any?
Me.
Okay. Besides you, there's not that many, there's not like, Steve the Werewolf novels out there about like Steve the Lord of, Britain.
That'd be interesting.
It would be. Okay, moving on.
Oh, you're asking about the myths?
Yes.
Okay.
But yeah, like I said before, didn't want to spend too much time on Vlad because it's a really weird instance, one of the few in history where the myth and the historical figure have such a gray area. Now, I understand that the history is always written by the victor, and there's stuff that we believe that probably never happened, and stuff that never happened that we've never heard of. But that was redundant. But I don't think there's any other figure in history or other whose alter ego and actual biography people don't know when to stop believing one and when to believe the other. I guess we could ask Renfield, but he's dead. So, on that note, was it Vlad's superior tactics that messed with the Ottomans, or was it just his sheer, unabated brutality?
Oh, it was the brutality. Yes, he himself was a great warrior. His men were great fighters.
And once again, another warrior who would get in the thick of battle. He never really stood on a horse, stood watching the whole situation from horseback. He was in there killing Turks just as much as, or killing Ottomans just as much as men were.
Oh, of course, he didn't want to miss out on the fun.
No. And the impalement, you didn't die right away. He was very well versed in anatomy. He could put that stake through your butthole, miss every vital organ on the way up, and have it come out the side of your neck, and you would slowly slide down it, and if you were lucky, you suffocated in your own fluids before the crows picked your eyes out.
Now, some people actually theorize the stake going up the bum might be kind of his last little revenge against some of his time in captivity.
Oh, yes. Yes, and that would make total sense, actually. Poor kid.
True. True that.
All right. So we go from Romania all the way to... Now, as Wolf said before, the whole Wallachian Vlad rule sort of took place in that weird gray area where we were kind of phasing out from medieval to more contemporary. So, to give more of a bullet point narrative of each of those particular ends of the spectrum, Wolf will now discuss the history of medieval armor as it evolved into what we'd call the current Renaissance. And by Renaissance, what's the Renaissance cutoff date? That's about like 16 something.
Yes, early 16s, somewhere around that area.
Pretty much when we figured out that the plague wasn't caused by an angry god, and we're able to move past that. So, backing me up. Okay, so Wolf, start us out with how did medieval armor kind of come into being to begin with?
Well, that's kind of a tricky question. It really does matter what time period you're talking about. If we're talking about the iconic start of the Dark Ages, we'll say, which roughly between 500 to 1000, somewhere in that area. Most people, if you see in movies, you'll see people in like plate armor. If you ever seen the old movie Excalibur,
Yes.
which was depicting the story of King Arthur, which was supposed to be sometime in the Dark Ages, which even they said in the movie. In the Dark Ages, there was no shining plate armor. There was none of that. The top of the great armor at that time, chainmail. If you're lucky, you might have a few pieces of plate sewn in there, but
What are those called? Brigadiers?
brigandine. And that's the reason why they hadn't developed plate armor at that time, is because their foundries and forges weren't large enough, and they didn't have the metallurgy skills to forge out big, giant pieces of solid plate.
Gotcha.
But chainmail is a very versatile and very sturdy armor.
Well, even to this very day, the only way that divers are protected from shark bites is through specialized chainmail diving suits. It's a technology that hasn't become obsolete.
True. And I've seen a number of tests on TV. If you've seen the show Conquest. When I was younger, I used to love that show. It gave good insight to medieval arms, weapons, and antiquities of that time. But as I got older and started doing my own research, I realized a lot of it was rubbish. They had many tests with chainmail armor on there. And they would show that, chainmail wasn't all that good of armor because you could hack through it, you could stab through it. It was flimsy. That's because they were not using riveted chainmail. They were using...
What is the difference between riveted chainmail and the chainmail that, we kind of think of chainmail as?
Most people think of chainmail nowadays as actually butted chainmail, where the rings are just butted together, not welded, not pinned, not riveted, nothing. So yes, you could stab through it, you could hack through it, arrows could go through it. But if you had riveted, which is a much more
painstaking process to make too, right?
Yes. Besides pounding out all the little rings, you then had to flatten said rings, put tiny little pinholes in them, and rivet them all together.
So I've seen people in SCA, and I've seen people during some LARPing events actually sporting. Now it's not historically accurate because I believe they used aluminum or titanium or something like that. But it looks almost like a keychain with a little hole through it at the tip. That's riveted, and each one of those is actually a hand riveted. Back then it would have been a hand riveted situation.
True. If it was an actual rivet, then yeah, that would actually be pretty good quality if it was made of steel. They also have other little cheater ways. They have interlocking ones now, which that would be better than just butted. But still, you could
even in situations like with the SCA or really heavy historical lifestyle reenactment, no one's actually out there with the intent of killing each other. Maybe bruised and broken, but not killing. So I can see maybe the technology going to the wayside a bit, just to make it look good, but not be practical, as let's say, back then when you were both trying to kill each other and be protected.
Well, true. I don't knock people because people don't really need battle-ready chainmail anymore. Most people, if they're going to get battle-ready armor, they go for plate, just because that's the more iconic and, to be fair, cooler.
It's very theatrical looking. It makes a lot of noise. It sucks for swimming, but
Well, not to get too drawn onto chainmail by.
Now, Wolf, I must say this conversation is riveting. Uh-huh.
Shut up, Doc.
Yes, sir.
Okay, not to get too carried away with...
Riveting conversation?
Shut up.
Okay.
With chainmail. Try and finish it all. Yes, chainmail was actually a lot better than what...
More better, more problems.
Shut up. But, Okay, in other words, it was a lot better than what certain shows like to make it seem like. You would actually have a fairly tough time stabbing through it, hacking through it, and even it was known to not deflect, but it would stop an arrow if you had good riveting and enough padding underneath.
Now, back to the nowadays analogy with the shark suits. The people that test these shark suits out put that down as one of the jobs I probably wouldn't want. Hey, stick your arm in the shark's mouth and see if it breaks off. But they do test on blues. They test on reef sharks. I think maybe every once in a while they'll test on an angry nurse shark. I don't remember, but the reason that they actually don't test on great whites, the teeth won't get through, but your arm's going to be turned to pretty much bone dust.
Yeah, that's the one thing chainmail does not protect against, and that's blunt force, trauma. Same thing if you got hit with a mace, or a hammer, or even a good sword. Yeah, it might not cut through, but you're going to have a few broken bones in that area.
Gotcha. So if you take a great white shark into battle, I'm just kidding, I'm sorry about that, I'm not trying to discount your knowledge, but that's what I was trying to draw a parallel to. Blunt force trauma is blunt force trauma, and the only way to deflect blunt force trauma would be through plate. What about Brigadin's good at that? Kind of.
Well, now that we're getting into that, I'll talk about the Brigadine. That was kind of the next step in armor evolution.
It was like the weird, evolutionary, hairless ape thing that transitioned between chainmail and plate.
If you want to make that analogy, yes.
Okay.
Just like chainmail, you're still going to wear the gambeson or the arming coat underneath, pretty much just wool, pretty thick undercoat.
Okay.
It'd be pretty hot. I wouldn't want to wear that in the summer.
No, there's this kid that was at one of our LARP battles. His name was Andreas. Hello, Andreas, if you're listening. Dude wore one of those things that you just described. It was about 103 degrees outside, and he was running around what looked like a quilt knitted by Grandma Num Nums. The poor guy was he was soaked in sweat by the end of it, and I'm pretty sure he got dehydrated, almost clinically.
Yeah, and the sad part is, during the First Crusade, that's what European knights wore. They did not wear plate armor. They wore, like in Kingdom of Heaven, they did get that part right. There was no plate armor, it was chainmail, and they still wore the padding underneath.
Now, I want to touch on something real quick, because the Crusades is a very hot-button issue, and I try to steer this show away from the realm of political intrigue, just because I kind of find if you pick a certain side, you immediately alienate half your audience. But I will say this. When it comes to the Crusades, I can't speak much for the Crusades 2, 3, was it 4?
I believe there was 4, maybe 5 total.
Okay. But I do know this. The First Crusade was not about Europeans doing a land grab. The First Crusade was simply because you had was it the Turks? What was the term? What was the term for it? I want to say Muslims because that's very generic and very discriminatory. What was the name of the actual empire?
I know they were considered the Saracens, but I can't remember the exact name of the kingdom.
Okay.
Or the empire.
Well, anyways, they were literally knocking on the back door of the Europeans. They sacked Constantinople. That's why it's called now Istanbul.
They invaded all the way into Spain.
Exactly.
And went all the way into France, decimating every European army until I forget his name, but I know he was known as the Hammer.
The Hammer of the Scots?
No, he was a Frenchman.
Oh.
Back when the French actually...
No, the French were at one point military badasses.
Yes. He saw what was coming. He petitioned the church relentlessly for money and land for training. He was this close from being excommunicated. At the last minute...
The Catholics woke up.
Exactly. And within a short time, he raised a large army, trained them, outfitted them, and was able to beat back the invading Muslims.
Okay. No, but back then they were actually referred to as Mohammedans. But that's neither here nor there. See, that's the one bone I have to pick with contemporary society nowadays, because they always want to draw a parallel with the reasons why bad shit happens involving Islamic terrorists. They want to parallel that, well, they're mad about the Crusades. Well, maybe Crusades 2 through 5, 2 through 4, but the first Crusade was more of a crusade of self-preservation. It was to put anybody, I don't care if Ralph Nader was in charge of it, back in the day, anybody with an empire knocking at their door, wanting to kill the armies and invade their land, would push the army back. And that was the first crusade. So this whole mythos that's kind of been developed about us retaking Jerusalem and this and that, that may have been a byproduct of what happened as a result of us trying to get rid of, not us, but the royal us, the Europeans, trying to push back an invading force. And that's something that I always kind of cringe when I hear about this on the media, or even in schools nowadays, when they try to lump all the Crusades together as pretty much angry Europeans trying to take back Jerusalem and do a land grab. And the first one was born of necessity. Now I can't speak for the whole situation with the next ones, but it started off as pretty much repelling the enemy.
It's a little bit more complicated than that. You could take that point of view at it. It did start off with them repelling them out of Europe. But then, kind of like throughout history, you have a chain effect of, now you have a bunch of angry Europeans saying, oh, look what they did.
Let's keep pushing, let's keep pushing, let's keep pushing.
Yeah, because at the time, Christianity was the dominant force in Europe.
Well, it's like when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object. And the people that were caught up in the middle of that were the pagans, were the polytheistic religions. I mean, the Library of Alexandria. If we actually had that still in existence, we would probably be at the flying car stage in our human evolution, because so much was lost when that library burnt down.
Well, yes, but we can talk about that on another show. But I'm not going to delve too far into the religious or the political aspects of the Crusades, but I will give props to the Crusaders in this one aspect of when they finally got to Jerusalem after years of warring, taking one city at a time. They were a starving army. They were depleted, low numbers, so starving that they were eating saddles or leather straps from their tents.
Oh dear.
Until they had a vision, and in the vision they were told they had to barefooted march around the city of Jerusalem 7 times, or for 7 days, while fasting. At the end of the 7 days, they stormed the city, and even though outnumbered, starving, low on numbers, they destroyed everything.
Keep in mind, Jerusalem, the climate and the ecosystem is very similar to that of the Antelope Valley, and I dare anybody listening to me right now who's an Antelope Valley resident to walk around the desert barefooted for 7 minutes, let alone 7 days.
Yes, and that's why there was a lot of atrocities that happened once they did take the city, because, I'll admit, if I had to go through that much crap.
Well, also, a lot of them were under presumptions by the, whatever the Catholic version of chaplains were at the time, that any and all atrocities committed in the name of the Catholic Church throughout the Crusades was pretty much instantly forgiven and instantly absolved.
Yes.
And so, I'm sorry, it's human nature, but when you feel that no matter what you do, it's going to be absolved and your place in heaven will be secured, anyone would have done some horrible stuff. I'm not condoning, I'm just saying there's a certain empathy there, because nobody alive in this day and age could actually relate to what they went through.
Sure. Well, I think we got a little off topic.
Yes, we did. Moving back to the armor thing.
Yes. Where were we? Brigadine, right?
We got Brigadine. We took the Crusade or the Crusades. Let's go back to the brigading being a bridge between chainmail and plate armor.
Yes. If you don't know what brigading is, it's pretty much...
It's a quilt with tiles in it.
Essentially, yes. Varying sizes of metal plates.
Weren't some ceramic actually back in the early uses of it? Or is that just something the SCA uses nowadays?
I believe that's just something the SCA uses.
Okay, strike that from the record.
Yes. I might be wrong, but I haven't heard of anything like that.
We've got to get Corey Hibbler in on this. Corey Hibbler was actually a pretty good, he'd be a good third person. So Corey, if you're listening, we're interested. Wolf, take it off, sorry.
Oh. Well, brigading was, like you said, the cross in between the chainmail and full plate. It had a pretty good, long-lasting influence, even into the high medieval age and even into the Renaissance. It was still a fairly popular and cheap means of armor. If you couldn't afford heavy plate, you could always get brigading. Pretty close. You could take most stabs, you could take most arrow shots, except crossbows. Crossbows pretty much will go through anything. Crossbows were actually frowned upon by the Pope because too many nobles of high birth were getting picked off by simple peasants with crossbows.
We can't have that.
Oh, of course not. But yeah, there's not too much more to be said about brigading. Very good armor, very versatile.
So let's go into the beginnings of plate mail.
Correct. You didn't really start getting plate armor until the late medieval age. And even that was somewhat segmented. You didn't have the full breastplates like I brought up in about the movie Excalibur. You did not get that kind of armor until very late medieval age. And that's only because they finally developed technology to forge out big pieces of steel and of good enough quality that it wouldn't shatter. Because steel at that time wasn't very good. A lot of slag, a lot of impurities, so you had a very high likability of it shattering or breaking.
Well, the whole process of refining the ore, I mean, it's like you find metal ore and you take the ore versus the actual processed metal. The ore can break apart in your hands. It's all about refining.
Correct.
And you would know that because you're a junior blacksmith.
Correct. Yeah, pretty much.
More of a senior, but
if just for the people who don't know, steel, same thing as iron. Steel is just the more purified version of iron. Iron is full of impurities, slag, stuff that isn't very beneficial to a good armor sword.
And did we last time we spoke, we were talking about the fanboyism of the katana?
Yes.
Okay. One thing I want to bring back to that is when people mention that, well, this katana was made of steel folded like 3,000 times or whatever, that's because Japanese iron was terrible. So it had to be by default. Is that not correct?
I will admit, for years, I believed that too. I believe, like a lot of the pro-Europeans swords, that, Japanese, they used pig iron and just crap metal.
Oh, so it was not that way.
Well, let me explain. It's more complicated than that.
My mistake.
Recently, I did do more diving into it. And no, they did not use pig iron. There really isn't any... Pig iron is pretty much the...
Pause real quick. For those of you guys, for those people who want to know what pig iron is, a good analogy would actually be go to Harbor Freight and pick up any of their cheap tools. Because that's pig iron. You're talking a screwdriver that breaks on a screw. I love Harbor Freight, but they are the home of disposable tools. Go back, Wolf. Sure.
Pig iron is actually kind of the byproduct of when you're smelting down to make good iron or good steel. It's pretty much the slag, the stuff that you scrape off the
So you
top.
can't have one without the other.
Yeah, but to be fair, Japanese, traditionally they use the really fine iron they found on their beaches, the black sand beaches.
Oh, really?
Yes. Now,
that makes sense because Japan is right there in a subduction zone. You would get volcanic. Amazing. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I'm also a junior geologist. Continue.
Now, nowadays, you can actually make super pure steel from that. But that's if you take a heavy-duty magnet, sweep it across the beach, and you have a big clump of pure iron.
A lot.
But back then, of course, they didn't have
magnets.
that. But to be fair, the end byproduct is comparable to what European steel was at the time. It was not pure. So both steels, in my opinion, are about the same. Like I said, katana is a good weapon. I would not want to have one coming at me.
Neither would I.
But it comes down to just what it was made for. It is a slicing weapon. It could not hack through armor like you see in animes or movies or video games. You did not parry another sword with it or anything with it, or else you would end up chipping, breaking, and you have a very useless sword.
You got a butter knife that's very expensive.
And to touch on the folding of metal,
let's go back. Sorry for the Japanese detraction here. Let's go back to what you were talking about with the technology that Europeans had to actually make plate.
Oh, yes. To make good plate, you needed good foundries, because you had to get the steel at least up to some purity level.
How did the Europeans figure out, or how did anyone figure out how to get something that hot? Just trial and error? Was it carried over from the Bronze Age?
The funny thing is, we still are not 100% sure how they figured it out, or even the processes of it, because blacksmithing throughout the Dark Age and Medieval Age was highly, what's the word? Secretive.
Secret. Because you don't want anyone knowing your secrets. If you're a blacksmith, that's your livelihood.
Yeah, you taught it to your son or your apprentice, and that was it.
And it being the Dark Ages, there was no manuals written about proper blacksmithery.
True. And even in the early days of blacksmiths, metalworking and blacksmithing was almost considered a magic.
Gotcha.
Because
a lot of alchemists, I didn't mean to cut you off, but a lot of alchemists with the Philosopher's Stone idea, like alchemy and metallurgy were kind of hand in hand, because one was just trying to create one metal from another metal.
True. Because if you look at it from a peasant in the Dark Ages or the early Medieval Ages,
it's like, oh, this guy can turn rocks into friggin' armor.
Yeah, because if you look at it, you're taking the four elements. You're taking earth, which is the raw ore, wind, the air from the bellows, fire from the forges, and water for the quenching.
So it's like an avatar.
Yes, you're taking the four elements and making it into a new item. A sword, a knife, an axe, something of real use that pretty much you took a clump of rocks and dirt and made it into something useful. They considered that almost a magic. And actually blacksmiths, a lot of times, were made to live outside of the community, because they were revered, but in some ways also feared.
Also feared. I can see that.
Same way with like herbalists, stuff like that. They were revered, but they still saw, well, these guys must have some magical powers. We don't want to live too close to them.
Well, it's like my buddy the Finisher actually showed me this new episode of this new series called Merlin, and there was a decree in the beginning of the very first episode that Uther Pendragon made that no magic users shall be allowed within the confines of the castle. However, that didn't stop him from keeping a herbalist physician on hand, saying, "Well, you make the good kind of magic, so we'll make an exception for you. But don't be doing that shit in public."
True. But back onto plate metal. When they started doing plate metal, they had finally started to touch on how to refine the steel into a more pure state that it wouldn't shatter or break or chip in a big quantity. And their forges were big enough to actually work steel that big, and just the skill of the blacksmiths improved by that point.
Interesting.
And everyone has that idea of the perfect knight in shining armor. In all honesty, that armor only lasted for roughly 100 years. That it only had significance, and that was not even in the medieval age. That was early Renaissance.
Also, if your armor's shiny, that means you haven't done anything with it.
Well, sure if I'm just using it as a...
I gotcha.
yeah, but full plate armor, Gothic armor, the Italian, I believe, Maximum or Maximilian armor. That did not get developed until the very, very end of the High Medieval Age, going into the Renaissance. And that had a lifespan of only 100 years or so, because that's when gunpowder.
Exactly. I was just about to say that. When the advent of gunpowder, making projectiles fly faster, the armor became virtually useless because it can stop a mace, it can stop an axe, you can't stop a bullet. And that's also why castles kind of went to the wayside too, because cannonballs.
Now, get back onto the plate armor. I do want to actually talk about what
Absolutely.
it was good for. Unlike what they show in movies, where you can just take a normal sword and cut right through it like a tin can, no. A sword, I don't care, katana, claymore, broadsword, there is no sword that can cut through actual hardened plate steel.
Is that why the rapier or the fencing was developed, was for the joints?
Somewhat. That still didn't come into existence till after that ended. The rapiers.
That's why I asked you.
Yes. They were more developed because now that you don't have armor, now they're relying on more speed and accuracy.
Gotcha.
But for plate armor, you could hack it as much as you want with a sword. You are not going to hurt the guy.
Is that what Warhammers came into existence for?
Yes. Now I will
Can
touch.
openers?
Yes, I will touch on that.
I'm sorry.
No,
I'm
no
just really
problem.
excited about this.
No problem. If you were a knight in the medieval age, high medieval age, going up against another knight with either Gothic or the Italian Maximilian armor, which were top of the line at the time, swords were kind of useless unless you had a long two-handed sword and you were hand and a halfing it, where you're not
Explain
hacking,
hand and a half.
where you have your dominant hand, normally your right hand, on the handle, holding it more like you would hold a backhanded. You would be using it as a stabbing motion, your left hand on the blade itself to help guide, and you'd be stabbing at the gaps in the armor, the armpits, the leg joints, anywhere that you could fit it, even the visor. And that was one way of getting around it. Another way was...
So what can go through plate?
well, nothing really can go through plate effectively. If you had a super battle axe, you might be able to get a bit into the armor, depending what armor it was. If you had top of the line Gothic or Maximilian, yeah, your chances of going through it with a battle axe, not very good. If you hit in the joints, maybe. But
So wait, if you're hitting the joints, don't you got to pass to the left?
yes, you would, Don.
Thank you.
Now,
I'm
With-
sorry, continue.
with an axe, the blunt force trauma behind it, since it is pretty weighted, would do some damage.
If I can interject real quick.
Yes.
We're talking about blunts and joints. I'm sorry. Moving on.
Okay. One of the more effective weapons versus heavy plate armor, the mace or the warhammer, both dealing in just pure blunt force trauma.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yes.
This is always something I wonder on my own.
Sure.
A mace and a morning star. Is the mace always within a fixed handle and the morning star is always with chain, or is it an interchangeable term?
The morning star, to my knowledge, is always on a chain. I might be wrong, but I believe it is with the chain.
Okay, and then a mace is just pretty much a hammer but with a ball at the end with either spikes or whatnot.
Yeah, the popular was the flanged mace, which it's not a ball of steel. It's pretty much a lot of
Slag? Sorry.
pieces of slated steel around a metal core.
Gotcha.
So pretty much increasing the impact at the point.
Gotcha. So you have an impact point.
Yeah, but back to what I was saying. Maces do good. Warhammers do good. Not because they'll crush the armor. A warhammer will not crush good heavy plate.
Will
But-
it pierce it?
No.
Really?
Oh, If you hit it with the back spike, you could pierce it, but like I said, good Gothic armor or good Maximilian armor, it will go in maybe an inch, maybe 2 if you're lucky.
Oh, wow.
But the padding and the chainmail underneath it.
So you're pretty much wasting a shot. And you might get your hammer stuck in the person's friggin' chest.
True. For the spikes, you would be still aiming for the joints, the neck. But even if you don't leave a dent with the bludgeoning part of the mace or the warhammer, the kinetic energy put behind it would be like getting in a small car wreck.
Oh, wow.
If you get hit in the rib cage, the metal will flex in enough that it could shatter your ribs. The impact could cause internal damage, bleeding, a lot of bad stuff. And in actuality, it doesn't matter if you have the greatest armor in the world. Any hit to the helmet with a good warhammer or mace will cause serious damage.
Understood.
Because it's still good steel, but it's going to flex in enough, and you're going to get concussion, get dazed, or just crack your skull. It might not do a lot of damage to the helmet, but it will do a lot of damage to your brain.
And back then, a skull fracture, that was almost a death sentence.
True, there has been...
Depending on the degree, obviously. I mean, there's archaeological evidence that people survived more than one, trepanation.
Yeah.
But still, though, this is back when, like I said before, it was so filthy, a paper cut or even a small wound could get infected and gangrenous, and there was no germ theory, you could die.
True.
So a skull injury, brain injury, aneurysm, I mean, that was, geez.
True. Now, the one weapon everyone always says is the surefire thing versus plate, and they always consider it the can opener, the halberd. The big, heavy-duty pole arm with a warhammer at one end, an axe or a back spike, and a big pike at the end of it. True, that is very effective. If someone's on horseback, you can dismount them, hook them, drag them off the horse. On foot, you have the reach, you have the bludgeoning power, but no, it is not a can opener. You're not going to split the guy's armor open, you're not going to cut the guy's armor open, you're not going to pierce him through and through. The most effective way to deal with a heavily armored knight is almost more suited for peasants. Of gang up on them, throw them to the ground, and with a dagger, shove it through the first joint or visor hole you can.
Wow.
But now, in actuality, not too many knights were killed in medieval battles because they normally come from nobility and royal bloodlines, which equals lots of money. So normally, you would knock him down, put a dagger through his throat, and says, "You're coming with me now, and your family's going to pay me a lot of money to get you back."
They were worth more alive than dead.
True. I mean, there's always the exceptions. I mean, if you were going up against your arch rival that you've hated since childhood, then yeah, you're probably going to gut him.
I know the feeling.
Yes. But yeah, there was still somewhat of a chivalric code between knights, not so much for peasants. Peasants would probably still end up killing them mostly because not too many nobles were willing to deal with peasants, and plus, if you were shamed enough by getting captured by peasants,
You might as well be dead.
essentially, yeah. But yeah, now it always just comes down to personal skill. You could be dressed in the best plate armor, best weapons, best everything, but if you're not skilled in anything,
You suck at your job.
yes, unarmored opponent can still take out a heavily armored knight. It just matters on the degree of skill.
I hate to keep drawing parallels here, but that's the whole thing with the ninjas becoming a thing in Japan. The ninjas were peasants who would take out samurai through kind of nefarious, quote-unquote, dishonorable means, with stabbing through joints, blinding them with their powdered egg bombs or whatever.
Sure.
So, not that I'm not saying that peasants in medieval Europe were hucking grenades, but at the same rate, if you had a specialized method of attack, I could see that.
Now, when it comes with ninjas and samurai, ninjas developed pretty much as the peasant resistance to feudal Japan and the samurai. It's not like in movies where there were guilds of ninjas later on.
Well, the thing about being a ninja was, if a samurai were to pass you on horseback or whatever, and you were just there raking a field, you could have been a ninja.
True.
Wearing a black hood, black underoos, looking like a Batman or whatever. That was sort of a dead giveaway. Ninja's whole thing was discretion.
Yes. And even one of the more iconic ninja weapons, the Ninja Star.
Yes.
The way that developed,
Available in Mexico.
the way that developed was actually they weren't into star shapes or any of the fancy stuff you see nowadays. They were just scrap pieces from the local blacks, because you would have all the little cut off pieces, the little scrap pieces that were still sharp and big enough but light enough to throw. And yeah, you'd see your local samurai lord riding down the road, collecting more taxes or just killing people because he could.
Testing out the sharpness of his blade.
Yep. It wouldn't take much for a little random farmer to say, chuck it at him and say, oh, no more samurai.
The pill for the corpse.
True. But yes, there is that whole mythos about the ninjas and being almost mystical, and yes.
More like a nanja.
Yes. I mean, I'm not going to take anything away from the ninja or
I know.
samurai.
That was actually a quote from a very underrated movie, Speed Racer. If you haven't seen it and you're a fan of the cartoon, go watch it. Perfect. Moving on.
Okay, now this pretty much brings us to the end of the medieval age, going into the Renaissance with the development of firearms. Now, if you can imagine, when firearms first came to...
Plate can't stop a cannonball, correct?
No, it can't. That's why, not to rag on the show any more than we did in the last episode, that's why Deadliest Warrior was so stupid. Medieval knight versus pirate. Why would you ever match those two up? It was already dead set against the knight. But not to rant on that too much farther.
I saw that one. I wasn't happy with it either.
But plate armor did still have a little bit of life left into it. Musketeers, they wore plate.
Oh yes, you're right.
Pikemen, which were still around through the Renaissance, wore plate. The Swiss Guard, they had the iconic breastplate, steel helmet, armed with long pikes.
Caroleans.
Yes. Their whole thing was, if you could march your row of pikemen and survive long enough through the gunfire and reach the infantry line of the musketeers or riflemen,
Which is the Carolean specialty.
yeah, you would probably want to be armed with a pike rather than a musket at that point. And plus the pikes, if you have a heavy cavalry charge, which was popular all the way up to World War I, pikes is a very good way to stop a cavalry charge.
Yeah. Turns out you kill the horse. Yeah.
But yes, after the development of gunpowder and firearms, you start to see the downfall of heavy plate. There was no point running around in heavy plate armor. It was expensive, not needed, and when these highly trained, highly paid, and just expensive knights are being able to taken out by peasants, it was not beneficial.
Gotcha. So on that note, we're going to transition from tactics and armor from the medieval and Renaissance eras. And next episode, we're going to take a more contemporary look at things. And once again, I greatly thank Wolfbane here for providing his commentary, his expertise, and his overall knowledge of stuff that I didn't know about. I hope you guys at home, in the car, wherever you are, also dutifully informed as I am. This is Doc Hartree signing off. Have a good day.